Hi guys, welcome to TMM. Today I'm going to be talking about my new schedule for videos and also having a small tutorial on poetry and my tips for it in section 1 of the GAMSAT. Alright, so just to start off the video, heading towards March in 2015, we've got a GAMSAT coming up. I tutor lots of kids for that test, and I usually focus each week on a specific section, either from section 1 or section 3, and I feel like I can share the key points from my lessons in these sort of 3-4 minute videos, one per week in the lead up to the GAMSAT to help with everyone's performance. And I'm also going to try and release on a Tuesday or Wednesday just like a random video, something different. I really like making videos, I like the creativity of it, so I'm going to try and generate some new content, something funny, something interesting, and go from there. But for this week, I'm going to focusing on poetry, the things that I think are important, more of a strategic way to approach it. As you know, if you've watched any of my videos, I'm all about that strategy. So I did way better the second time, and I prepared theoretically way less, but I prepared with many strategies that got me a way better mark. Not to say that you don't need theory, but you need to balance the wet theory with a heavy dosing of strategy. So poems in the GAMSAT are testing your ability to infer symbolism, understand pacing, understand context of the written language, and to understand that often there is vastly more expression to a piece of poetry than what is literally written. Now I'm going to break it down for you. For every question that you get on the poem, there'll be 4 answers, right? Typically, there'll be 2 answers that are close in meaning, but one is more symbolic, one is more literal. So for example, there is a poem by called No Music by John Montague. And I'll put the poem up here. And it's a poem that discusses the difficulty in leaving someone. So the fact that when you leave someone, you're the one to blame. And to quote, "You will always have me to blame. Can dream we might have sailed on from absence's rib, a warm fiction." So that little bit is the sort of the turning point of the poem. He says, "You will always have me to blame," right? That's straightforward. Can dream we might have sailed on from absence's rib. So to think about what we might have been whilst I'm gone. What a nice thing to think about. And here you'll have me to blame when you have this going through your head. I.e., when you're reminiscing about what we could have been together, you'll have me to blame. Now, a lot of people, when you see absence's rib and warm fiction, they just go to sleep. You know, you don't pay attention, or you just don't understand. And when you get to the question, it says, the author implies, A and D are clearly wrong, so I'm not going to say it. B, that it is harder to leave than be left, right? C, the blame is easier to be placed on the self rather than the other. Now, although B is quite literally correct, that is, he's saying that it's harder to leave than be left, he is implying more. The question asks what the author implies, not what the author says. So often, it's easy when you don't understand that well to pick the literal answer, because people will look at the question, go back to the poem, find the line, and just directly sort of copy paste. But the problem with that is you're missing the overall intention of the whole piece. So the answer is C, that blame is easier to be placed on the self than on the other. Because he's talking throughout about the fact that whilst both sides are to blame, it's easier to do it yourself and to leave than placing the blame on the other. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I guess the way I understand poems is each stanza, right? It's got its own intention. It's like a premise. So whenever you make an argument or when you're writing an essay, you make 3 premises or 4 premises. So, for example, I like chocolate more than I like cheese because chocolate is sweet. That's premise A. Because chocolate makes you feel good, premise B. And then premise C, because cheese is really fattening and I don't like the way it feels in my mouth. Premise 3, and then that forms the overall conclusion that chocolate is better than cheese, right? So that's a really dumb way of explaining what a poem does. You'll have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 stanzas. They're all trying to point out one emotion, one premise relating to whatever the overall message is. And usually when I read it out, so I'll tell you a sore truth. Little understood, it's harder to leave than to be left. To stay, to leave, both sting wrong. So for that stanza, I would have written, it's easier to stay than leave, although staying in a relationship that's not working is also wrong. Okay? That way, when I go back to the questions and I'm trying to understand, line 2, line 3, stanza 1, I can understand what he was going for in that stanza, going back with my own writing. Sort of like paraphrasing. And that helps with the overall understanding. Even if you just do that when you're practicing poetry for the first time, it'll help you get into the idea of paraphrasing it. Like for example, Shakespeare, right? You don't literally read Shakespeare because the language that it's written in isn't appropriate for the English of our time. But if you paraphrase some of the things that he says, and mix and match words like hereafter, done, with, thou, hith, hi, though, thy. If you can paraphrase it in your own language, then his stories and his meanings become way more clear. I am not a PhD in poetry or philosophy, and I'm sure I'm going to get comments saying I'm really dumb and I'm wrong, but for the GAMSAT, you just really have to focus in on, if you can get it to 2 answers, one seems more literal and one seems more symbolic, typically the symbolic one is right. That's pure strategy. If you can just vaguely understand what's going on and pick one that's more symbolic and makes more sense, pick that. Because 3 out of 4, the symbolic one will be right, and the literal will be right, the 1 out of 4. Excuse me. And one thing you really have to concentrate on is that, especially in section 1 and section 3, you're not gunning for 100%. It's not a good mindset to have when you're going into a question, but when it comes down to it, time is your ultimate enemy, especially in section 1. There is masses of text and not enough time to answer the questions. So if there are ways that you can get it down to 2 and then just be like, yep, that's right, or yep, that's wrong, I'm a fan of doing that, rather than sort of laying over it and letting it fester and really trying to understand this text for too long, wasting your time, and then you realize that you spent 5 minutes reading, not answering the questions, and you only have 3 questions. So it's all about that time to benefit sort of thing. If you see that you've got a big sonnet and you have 6, 7 questions, sure, spend ages on that poem trying to understand what's going on because you really want to get all those questions right. But if you've got 2, 3 questions, which is often the case with big sonatas or little poems, then you need to really focus in on just hitting the basic idea of it and then picking the answers that are the ones that are symbolic and showing more, okay? And finally, the last thing that I want to add in is length of the poem and rhythm of the poem. 2 things little understood, but vastly important. So like I said, there's premises to poems that have multiple stanzas, right? If you have a 4, 5, even 6 line poem, okay, there's a reason that it's got notoriety, it's become famous. The poems that have made it into the GAMSAT have obviously stood the test of time, unless they're from a modern poet, which is highly unlikely, okay? The reason that they stand the test of time is because the words that they've used, especially in short poems, have to be extremely, extremely insightful and leading on to further discussion or thought. Now you have to appreciate that if you get a small poem, be extra aware for any language that may be symbolic of something more or something sarcastic. some sort of device that is inferring something more than what is literally written. I know I've repeated that multiple times, but that's the emphasis of today. You need to look for symbolism with your magnifying glass when you're reading poetry. And it's not in a way that you look at the answer to the questions and then try and work out where the symbolism is. You need to work out where the symbolism is when you're reading it originally, because otherwise you'll be led to the wrong answer. I think that's about as fast as I can talk in one go. So I think that's basically all I got to say. Yeah, paraphrasing, rhythm. Rhythm. The rhythm also is important. So read the poem and only stop at punctuations. Okay, sorry, my camera sort of shut out. But I was talking about rhythm of the poem, and if you look at No Music, which I put a link below, you'll see that when I read the original stanza, I didn't stop at little understood, or I didn't stop at to trample on past affections. You read it like it's written out in normal language. The reason they do it in stanza form is for the lining to make sense and the stanzas are the same size. But the way you read it is with normal grammatical intention. So make sure you do that, and note that when the rhythm changes, that usually indicates that something has become more menacing, shorter sentences, becoming faster, means more, like that. Right? So when something is meant to be emphasized, it'll be slow, very clearly, clarity, explained very well. Hopefully like the way I speak. But rapid, sharp, very short, tiny clauses that all are commed with a freed colt, all lead to an erratic and menacing tone, which can help you infer the symbolism that we're ultimately looking for in all of our poems, like we've said at the start. A really good exercise for poetry going forward: look up free poems, look up poems by anyone you've heard of, Robert Frost, anyone really, John Montague, W.B. Yeats, T.S. Eliot, Edgar Allan Poe, the list goes on. And read a poem that you find difficult. Really try and understand what's going on as best you can. Doesn't matter if you don't get it, just try. And then write out what you think it is, like a little summary. Then go on Shmoop. Okay, I'll put the link below to schmoop.com. It's like Spark Notes. It's like an analysis website for poetry. It has other notes on there, but look up specifically the poetry. And usually they'll have paraphrased or have some expert who's not me, someone much, much, much better and trialed in poetry, will have read it, written about it, and will explain the symbolism. And you'll find that if you do this, say, 4 to 5 times, that's all it takes, you'll become really good at picking where the key sort of words are that are the sort of turning points or the poetic devices that are being used in the poem. And that was one thing that really helped me going from GAMSAT 1 to GAMSAT 2, because I looked at poems in a different light and I almost appreciated the way that they were constructed, which really helped in answering the questions. And it literally went from being the type of question I'm like, well, crap, I'm going to get 0 on this one, I've just got no idea, might as well just guess, to being, this is easy, it's free marks. As soon as I can pick the symbolism, I'm going to get all these questions right. And hopefully that's the way it should be for you. So thanks for watching this video. This is my first weekly installment on poetry.
Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. The Latin term for that sentiment is carpe diem. Now, who knows what that means?
Carpe diem. That's seize the day.
Very good, Mr.
Meeks.
Meeks. Another unusual name. Seize the day. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may. Why does the writer use these lines?
Because he's in a hurry.
No. Ding! Thank you for playing anyway. Because we are food for worms, lads. Because believe it or not, each and every one of us in this room is one day going to stop breathing, turn cold, and die.